Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Brian Robinson. Brian is a sales and marketing expert. He's a best-selling author, and he's a coach. He's worked as a salesperson for some of the best-known companies in the world, including Johnson and Johnson and Coca-Cola. So he's been in the trenches over the last 2 decades, face-to-face and phone presentation style, and selling to these Fortune 500 companies all the way down to small businesses and entrepreneurial ventures. Brian is the author of an Amazon #1 best-selling book called The Selling Formula, 5 Steps for Instant Sales Improvement. And that's exactly why I wanted to have Brian here on the show today. So in the conversation I had with Brian just now, we just wrapped up, we went through those 5 steps in detail. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of what those 5 are, just to tease you so that you know what to listen for. Those 5 steps are connect, interview, present, share, and close. So if you want to know the rest, you'll have to listen to the episode. So basically what Brian did is he broke down the key framework that he presented in his book, and we talked through each of those 5 steps in detail. I offer some really great examples and all of the why behind each of those 5 steps. A couple of the other things that we talked about throughout the course of the conversation is the importance of having a pre-built list of questions. He recommended a 10-question sheet that you're using in your customer interviews, in your sales calls, and having those prepared on paper, ready to go for any sales calls that you have. He talked about the importance of having those questions be a combination of fact-finding types of questions and emotional kinds of questions. We talked about the importance of that. In the course of the conversation, we talked about setting the agenda of every meeting and why that's so important. We talked about interviewing like you are a reporter. We talked about pricing strategies. How do you share price? Because I know that's a big question for everyone. Like, how do I share price? How do I get somebody to understand why we price the way we do price with our product? And we also talked about the importance of including a guarantee with your product and presenting that guarantee early in your sales process. So in this 5-step process, we walk through this 5-step process as if there was a single sales call that went through 5 of these steps. And you certainly could do that in the right environment. You can also think about these 5 steps as a more protracted sales process. So over the course of 6 months or 3 months or 12 months, having these key steps, these key stages in your sales process, whether it's a single conversation or a conversation over a number of weeks or months, in either case, this is a framework that you can use and adopt to keep a really simple and clear framework and control around your sales process. So that's kind of the crux of the conversation with Brian. A couple of other things we talked about is journaling, something that I do every day. I do morning pages and been doing that for about 7 years now, maybe longer at this point. I can't remember. And he does the same. He does some journaling, which was the genesis. It's how he came to write this book in the first place. Another fun fact about Brian, which we didn't get a chance to talk about, but Brian and Cindy, they live in Oklahoma City, and they have 8 children, 8 kids, which probably could be the topic of an entire podcast in and of itself. So this is a man that's been in the trenches for a couple of decades. He's sold for big enterprises. He's been coaching salespeople and has written this book called The Selling Formula. So I definitely recommend grabbing a copy of the book. You can simply go to the website, thesellingformula.com, and that'll bring you right to a place where you can buy the book, or just head over to Amazon and grab a copy there. He's got not both, but he has a hard copy, a Kindle, and an audio book edition as well. So that's what to listen for in my conversation with Brian Robinson. So let's head over and enjoy.
Hey, Scott.
Brian Robinson.
Can you hear me all right?
Loud and clear, man.
Good.
Crystal clear. How about me?
Yeah, you sound fantastic.
Well, thank you. You sound fantastic yourself. Should we dive right in? You ready to rock and roll?
Yeah. Let me get rid of this reminder on my screen here. There it is. Okay.
Cool. Well, dude, it's good to have you on the show. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you, Scott. Really looking forward to this.
Yeah. So, I've already done a bit of an intro telling the folks who you are and what we talked about, but always love to ask our guests directly when people say, hey, Brian W. Robinson, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
Yeah, I now work with a company I helped start about 20 years ago called Works 24. We do in-lobby digital signage overhead music and on-hold messages for primarily credit unions and banks all over the country. We've
Okay.
got some vertical markets in some other spaces as well, but that's been my primary focus for a couple decades now.
And you're also, dude, you're forgetting the important stuff too. Best-selling author. Like,
You're
you
very
don't tell
kind.
people that you're a best-selling author? Hi, that would be the first thing I would tell them.
I don't tend to lead with something like that.
Oh, I
People
know.
might think that's puffery.
It is puffery.
Yeah,
But for purposes of podcasts, we want to give people a reason to keep on listening. And so, and that's the book is the reason that we really want to have you on the show.
right on.
I'll do the puffery for you. So the book is called The Selling Formula, 5 Steps for Instant Sales Improvement. And so you and I obviously spoke a couple of weeks ago, getting ready for our conversation today. And what I was hoping we could do is just kind of break down some of the key parts of your book and how you approach this idea of the selling formula. So
Sure.
is that with you?
I would love to. Yeah.
Okay. So what was the genesis of the book in the first place before we get into what's in the book? Because I mean, I've written a couple of sales books and sometimes I feel like, okay, yet another sales book. But on the other hand, I'm like, no, I wrote this book because nobody's thinking about it this way. So what was the catalyst for you to get you to sit down and put pen to paper?
The catalyst was I do a lot of journaling, Scott, and I was sitting outside journaling one morning, and I started to ask myself, what is the consistent theme that I've used with respect to my sales approach over the years that I've been doing it? And I started to put some information down on the paper and review what I'd been doing in my mind, and it came out with, oh my gosh, I've been doing the same type of approach and it's worked really well. What if I could help anybody who's in sales or starting in sales get into a place where they could reduce their learning curve dramatically? And that was the whole impetus. If I could take someone and show them this approach, I think it would help them. And I did a lot of coaching on the side prior to this book and kept using those same components of the formula, but I hadn't codified it yet. And so that allowed me to recognize, gosh, if I could get this in a book and get this in the hands of a bunch of people, maybe it would really help them. So that was the whole purpose.
That's cool. I wanted to ask you about the journaling. Is that an exercise in morning pages? It's something I've been doing for about 6 or 7 years now. Is that the same?
Yeah, I've been journaling for 20 plus years, probably 30 years now. And it's really part of my personal approach to my spirituality and connecting with the Lord and just really hearing things more clearly. It's really helped me a lot.
That's cool. What got you journaling in the first place?
What got me journaling is some people are able to communicate in different forms and fashions and kind of get their feelings and thoughts out. For me, just putting pen to paper, I started doing that years ago, and I found that that's just a terrific outlet for me to get stuff that seems kind of stuck in my mind and my heart out on paper, and it allows me to see it in a different light, kind of from a third party perspective, as opposed to being stuck inside my bottle and I can't read the writing on my own label.
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, it's I think a similar exercise in that it just helps me figure out what am I thinking. So I've heard Tim Ferriss talk about this, and I'm not sure if it was his idea or not, but he talked about writing is a way to know what you're thinking about. Because some people say, well, I don't know what to write because I don't know what to write down. And he said, well, the reason you write is so you figure out what you are thinking. And so for me, it's just like plopping down and getting everything out on the page. That it is a third party point of view because it forces me to. It's almost like writing a letter. Like if I was writing a letter to someone, explaining to them what's going on in my brain. What am I thinking about today? What's ahead for the day? What am I stressed about? What am I excited about? And I don't really have a form or function. It's sort of taken a function of sitting down, and usually I start thinking about work stuff first. Maybe that's just a sign that I think about work a lot, or hopefully more. It's a sign like everything else around my life is good, so I don't have any other stresses except for work. That's the interpretation I'll take.
But if I can interrupt you, Scott, on that point, I started looking over my journals over the past some odd years, and I said to myself, I'd be embarrassed if my kids saw some of the stuff I've written because it's the same stuff related to work over and over.
Yeah. That's true. It's like snooze, snooze.
Yes.
The good news is my penmanship's so poor. My son has watched me write, and he's 8, so like he'll write stuff down, and I'll say, look, yeah, you have to write your E. Your E can be better than that. You could do a better G than that. And then he's just like, well, what about your writing? And then he just scribbles across the page and just, he's like, that's how you write. And I'm like,
You're
yeah,
busted. You're busted, Scott.
so, no, that's cool. I think it's a good exercise. I always encourage people to do it. It was introduced to me um, uh, by a friend of mine, like I said, about 6-7 years ago. He said, you should try this. I think it'll help you sort some things out that you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just been a constant ever since. So whenever I find somebody else that's doing that, I'm always curious as to their approach. So
Yeah,
so the journaling got you into the book, and
it did.
And you've been you've been coaching, and you've been sharing these concepts,
Mm-hmm.
and the book was a way of collecting that into a more cogent way to present to somebody who's not there on a call with you. Is that the way?
Right.
About it?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and it works. I've got a friend who's in the medical industry. That was an industry I had come from previously, and he used this book with his team that's launching a new product. It's a high-end product that reduces issues with the brain that cause pain in the body and so on. They have a stimulating device. But the bottom line is this process works in all kinds of industries. Not everything, obviously, but you can apply it, you can tweak it and make it work, which is really gratifying to see.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. So let's maybe we can dig into the book a little bit. So like the subtitle is 5 Steps for Instant Sales Improvement. And then within the book, and just on the Amazon page, and I've flipped through it as well, where you've also talked about specific phrases and ideas that people could be using. You've talked about some of the most common selling challenges and how to overcome those. So, I mean, I know we can't obviously cover everything in the book, but I'd love to hear from you, maybe just like as the framework for the book, those 5 steps for instant sales improvement. What are those? And give us some context for how those are important.
So let me share the 5 steps, and then I'll give you some context like you requested. First is to connect with your prospect and set the agenda for the conversation. This is critical, especially setting the agenda. And I'll circle back to that. Second is interview. And it really is like an interview. Somebody who's a reporter might sit down and speak with somebody. So you've got to really craft your questions ahead of time. Third is present your solution based upon, of course, what you learned in the interview. Fourth is sharing your pricing and guarantees. And then finally, close the deal. So with respect to connecting and setting the agenda, I found that the most disarming way to get an individual or literally a whole boardroom of people to come to attention is to simply say this: Scott, would you be opposed to my sharing the agenda for our conversation today? It's just 3 points. Well, of course, everyone says, yeah, where are you going? I'd love to know where you're going. And you share your key points. First, I'd like to ask you some questions to better understand your situation. And I've got some questions actually written out here that I'll be reading to you and asking for feedback on. And then secondly, I'm going to share with you the key components of our service that would apply potentially to our conversation. And then finally, we'll talk about pricing and guarantees. And that's how I start the convo. And it's, again, pretty disarming because I think a lot of salespeople don't tell their prospects where they're going. And because of that, it's kind of like grinding the gears when they start. It doesn't feel natural. So I think most people want an agenda when you start. And one of the other components is connecting. And I think that's really critical, of course, in any conversation, any relationship. And one of the most, again, disarming phrases that I've ever found is to simply, when you finally sit down with somebody or catch them on the phone and say, hey, have you had to put out any fires today? And that really brings people up into where they are at the moment and allows you to have a conversation about what's been going on in their day so they can kind of get that out of their mind and then start focusing on the agenda that you have at hand. Make sense?
It does. And there's a couple of things in there as you were describing it, Brian, that to maybe add to it or add some color.
Hmm.
The first one, like working backwards, this idea, like if you had to put any fires out today, or some kind of any sort of question around empathy, that not like, hey, how's it going? Like
Yeah.
a more pointed question, because you mentioned if you're in a boardroom of people, like if you're selling to executives, um, you know that they're putting out fires,
Hmm.
and just getting a sense for like where are they right now? Because if we're about to go sit in this sales call, whether it's a virtual room or a phone call or an actual room full of people, like how focused are they going to be in what I'm about to say? Because if they turn around and say, well, listen, actually, I just came from a tough conversation. I had to lay off 7 people and it was really tough. And so I'm just walking out of that meeting over to here. So if I seem a little off, or if it seems like I'm not paying attention, that's why.
Hmm.
Like, wow, okay. That just gives you a lot more context as a salesperson to know, like, what can I truly expect out of this interaction that I'm about to have, and maybe not try to force the sale and just maybe take the call and divide it in half and say, well, we'll just do this today and do another one tomorrow, something like
Right.
that. So I like the empathy piece of that, asking a more pointed question rather than just the standard "how you doing."
Hmm. I agree. Empathy is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and right now one of the questions I've been using personally, and I've been suggesting it to our clients, is like right now we're in mid-April when we're recording this, and all the COVID, coronavirus happenings around the world. And I think a lot of people like have seen like, hey, are you staying healthy? How are things going? And I
Hmm.
think that's the new "how you doing"
Yeah.
question. And so the question I've been using with people is, over the last couple of weeks, is what in particular has been most surprising for you
That's a
um,
great question.
with your customers or with your team or personally, or is it
Hmm.
anything that's been unexpected with everything that's happening right now? What's been most unexpected for you?
Hmm.
And that for me has really gotten people talking, because sometimes I'll ask them the question expecting a business response. Okay, what's been most surprising for you? Oh, well, what's been surprising is the deals are accelerating, things are going great. But sometimes they'll say, oh, the thing that's most surprising is like how much I realized I haven't spent as much time with my family
Hmm.
as I should be. And now with being home all day, I realize I haven't had that opportunity. And all of a sudden, a simple question that I was just asking more from a business standpoint, you realize they're willing to open up, and maybe it's an indicator that they already trust you because they're willing to share that kind of stuff with you.
Yeah, and maybe they're finally starting to think about those things because they're being forced to, and it's top of mind now.
Yeah. So that question that you're asking, or some form of that question, have you had to put any fires out today? I think is great. And then working backwards to your set agenda. The thing I love about this is it's like there's a lot of things I love about it. It seems really simple. You like set the agenda. People are probably thinking to themselves like, well, duh. But more times than not, it doesn't happen. I see it myself when I'm buying stuff. I see it with
Hmm.
when I'm reviewing coaching calls with people. And if you're dealing with executives, for example, you got a room full of people. How many times do they go into a meeting with their staff or with their board, and everything's on them all the
Yeah,
time? I always have to set the agenda. I always have to lead the meeting. I always have to make sure we get to these outcomes we want to get to. And you sit there and you say, "Hey, I've got the agenda for the meeting." It's fun. It's almost like this release of responsibility. Like, oh, finally, I'm in a meeting where I don't have to do all the work here. I'm
I
the
totally
passenger
agree.
for a change.
Yeah, it's like we can relax now and let someone drive this for a little bit.
Yeah, this guy or this woman, like she's got it together. Like she's not walking in here kind of hoping I'm going to know what to do. She's done
Mhm.
this 50 times, and she knows exactly where this meeting should go.
Right on.
And I always appreciate that.
Yeah,
And
I do
if people
too.
don't set the agenda, I do it myself. I mean, I even do that with salespeople. If they're calling me and it's a service or a product I'm interested in, if they don't set the agenda, I'll just jump in and say, okay, so listen, Brian, we've got 30 minutes here. What's the best way for us to make the most out of the time we've got?
Right.
And the salesperson's just like, a lot of times their jaws drop, like,
Yeah.
oh, well, I thought we'd show you a demo and do this. I'm like, okay, that's cool. I just want to know where we're going with this.
Right. I'm laughing because that's exactly how I feel when I speak with vendors that approach me as well. And then I find myself evaluating what they're saying. And that works really well. It calms people down, because I've been in, I know you have, in conversations like you mentioned earlier with salespeople that really don't seem to show up with an agenda other than, let me show you my stuff. And that's not an agenda.
Yeah. They're expecting you, like, you requested the demo, so I'm going to show you the demo. So right. I expect you to tell me that if the demo is good, tell me if the product solves your problem, tell me that you want to buy it, or tell me what you want to do next. And they're sort of like walking into a meeting hoping all these things happen. Mm-hmm. And if instead of doing all that, like you said, if they just connect and set the agenda and say, look, I see we've got, you requested a demo, we've got 30 minutes today. So usually what works really well is for meetings like this is if I spend about 15 minutes showing you some of the product, I'll ask you maybe 5 minutes, ask you a couple quick questions, spend 15 minutes looking at the demo. And then that way we can spend about 10 minutes talking about next steps, which might include some pricing questions you have. It might include, maybe we need to do a demo for other people in your team. We've got some ideas, but if you're okay with that, how about we dive in?
Who wouldn't be okay with that? Right.
Yeah. Who wouldn't be okay with that?
Yeah,
exactly. And the second thing I love about the set agenda is what you talked about is it's like a future pacing. Like you said, a lot of times people go into, so not just the seller doesn't know where the meeting's going, but then the buyer, if the buyer doesn't know where it's going as well, they're like, well, are we even going to get to pricing? Or like, am I going to walk out of this meeting still unclear as to what the next steps are? And if you can take that variable away, say, hey, we're going to talk about this, we're going to do this, and then I'm going to talk about pricing. Then they're like, oh, okay, cool. So now I know where we're going with this meeting.
It inspires confidence.
And I know I'm going to walk out. Yeah, it's the confidence thing. Mm-hmm. So sounds so basic, but you just do that. I feel like if you do that, it's like you're done. You've already improved your sales probably 80%.
I was going to say you're 80-20 right there, aren't you?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. So then second step, you said interview someone like you're a reporter. So I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah. In fact, let me give you an example of this. When I was with Johnson and Johnson, one of the divisions I was in was called Ethicon Endosurgery. And we had an entrenched competitor by the name of US Surgical. And I was selling laparoscopy equipment that you use through scopes with video. And one of the devices we released was a hernia stapler. And our competitor, again, had been in that space for quite a while before we got into it. And I was getting incredibly frustrated with trying to figure out how to break in to the OR and get these surgeons to try this device, which we knew was clinically superior to our competitors. So I started to craft these questions, and I started to think of what would I need to say at the scrub sink in order to get into that case. And it took me hours to craft about 10 questions. And I started to use them, and they started working, and they started to agree to try it. And then I doubled my sales, my valuations of that product in 30 days from 1 to 2. I'm just kidding. But then I started tweaking it more, and it got better and better, my results. And then the people I was training, I was a trainer also at that time, they started seeing me use this question list. I was very open about this list with the physicians I was talking to. And they said, can I borrow that list, or can I get a copy of it? So they got a copy, and they got the exact same results that they followed the questions in order. So there was clearly a way to do this. And so what I discovered is anytime we had a product launch, I would take quite a bit of time to look at the features, benefits, and the appropriate questions that would elicit the benefits necessary in order to have a really good conversation and get somebody interested in what we were talking about. And so that's kind of the concept behind the interview. Is I recommend you write out your questions. And if you're in a sit-down meeting, I tell the prospect, I have a list of questions I've prepared for our conversation today, and I'm going to be taking notes on them on the list which I've created. Is that okay? Well, sure. And so they know, again, I'm going somewhere, and I'm taking notes. And there's a feeling and a sense that you really value their responses when you're taking notes on their answers. and they know that you're going to another question next, and there's a reason for it. And of course, you skip questions if they're not appropriate, even if you've created them for the conversation. And it really made a gigantic difference in the way they perceived me and the way they felt about the answers they were giving me, because they felt valued and important, which they were.
Do you remember some of the questions specifically? Like what were, and were there, did they take a certain form in the sense like question 1, 2, and 3 were designed to open or elicit a certain pain point, or like what are examples of some of the questions that you had?
The first questions, well, I actually have a feature benefit question series I can share with you from the book, if that's okay.
Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah. So this is taking it away from medical. This is a pretty simple, straightforward approach, but this would be for somebody who's considering pre-made home cooked meals for 2. Okay. So the feature, so here's the feature: pre-made home cooked meals for 2 to 6 people. Then you'd write out your benefits next to that feature. There's generally multiple benefits, of course, associated with a feature. So the first benefit would be it saves up to 60 minutes per meal, including food purchase, preparation, and cooking time. Another benefit, number 2, is just pull it out of the freezer and put it in the oven. So then the 3 questions you might consider asking, from really kind of general fact-finding down to emotional, would be: question 1 is, on a weekly basis, how many dinners do you cook for your family? So it's kind of a general question.
Number but also 2, a qualification question.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
And question 2, how much time does it typically take you to make a dinner for your family? Third, and this gets down to the emotional level and the most important, if you could just pull your dinner out of the freezer, already prepared, and put it into the oven without having to think about it, how would that affect the frequency of your family meals? Now you're getting to a place where they're thinking about their family and their interactions and so on. So that was the tact I tried to take with respect to the questions in any product or service, is move to that emotional level, because that's where things really start clicking and happening in the prospect's mind with respect to owning something.
All right, folks, we are off and running in my conversation with Brian Robinson. One of the things I want to do is make sure that you know how we can help you. If you're a startup founder, you're a sales VP, if you're leading an early stage startup or a sales team at an early stage company, there's lots of ways that my team and I here at Sales Quality can help you. And that includes everything from content we're posting on LinkedIn and videos. We have my book available for download, as well as my current book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, available for download, as well as other books and other resources available for download. I'm running webinars, live trainings, and workshops online right now. And of course, we have our coaching program. So, all of that information about whether you just want to read an article or learn more about our coaching program is all available in one simple place. And that's over at salesqualia.com. That's salesqualia, Qualia.com. Over there at the website, you can read a bunch of blog posts. You can check out other podcast episodes. You can download a copy of Stop Hustling and Start Scaling, add yourself to the email list, or you can just send us a note right from there and book in a one-on-one call with me to do a sales audit of your sales process, so I can help you identify where you have some gaps and how we might be able to help you out. So everything that you've got is right there, that one place, salesquality.com. So head over there, take some kind of action, make sure that at a minimum, you grab a copy of the book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, and make sure that you add yourself to the email list, because we're sending out notifications and updates every day, not every day, probably like a couple times a week. Every day would kind of be a lot, but you get the point. Learn about the stuff, get on the email list, go check it out. Let's head back to my conversation with Brian Robinson.
100%. I mean, people think about enterprise sales. If I'm selling software or analytics or some piece of hardware, you always assume that it's a logical sale. Well, I'm just going to show you these features, and if they check the boxes to show you how we solve the problem you have, then people should want to buy. And the fact is that sales and purchases are emotional. There's people use logic to justify the emotion. So if they feel like, hey, your software is going to help me save time, in the back of their mind, they're thinking, well, that means I don't have to be on my cell phone on the weekends anymore. Right. Handling IT tickets, which means I'm going to be able to pay attention to my kid's soccer game.
Right on.
Instead of, head down. So what you're doing is just actually putting that in front of them and getting them to say it out loud. what would that do for your family time? That's a very basic example in a consumer world to say, like, meals, pre-made meals. The framework is critical to go from fact finding to emotional, whether you're doing meals or hernia staplers or
Right.
enterprise software. You have to weave in at least a couple of emotional questions to kind of get a sense for where that person is and how it would really affect them individually in their role.
Yeah. And for your listeners, the easiest way to do this is with a piece of paper or a spreadsheet. Just make 3 columns. Column 1 would be your feature. Column 2 would be the benefits associated with that feature, no matter how many there are. And third would be the questions related back to that benefit. And it's kind of fans out from if a V on the left, the apex to the left, and then it fans out to the right with more questions and benefits and so on. Then break it down to an 80-20 approach and use those top 20% questions that you think would have most benefit.
Yeah, I love this. The other thing I like about this questioning strategy, I mean, a couple things, just like with the set agenda that I like. Number one is having them built out in front of you just makes it easier for you to focus on the conversation. Because I know myself, if I'm talking with somebody, we always, like most of us implicitly, when we're supposedly listening to someone, what we're oftentimes doing is thinking about what are we going to say next. So you're trying to process information that is being shared with you, as well as think about what you're going to do in the next part of the conversation. And so just getting that down, it almost removes that need to think about like, oh, what's my next, what should I ask next? So it allows you to, I think, more diligently focus in on and listen to what that person is sharing with you. So I like that approach a lot. Number 2, then you don't have to worry about forgetting. Like, I know myself, I'm guilty of this. I leave a meeting, I'm like, I forgot to ask. I didn't ask that question. So if it's on the list, then it's just a checklist. Yeah. It's easy to follow through. And the third thing I like about it is if you have 10 on a list, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 12, whatever your list looks like, and you've got 30 minutes with a prospect, and you tell them, hey, I've got these, I put together these 8 questions. I'd love to go through those with you. And it's, now it's 29 minutes into the meeting and you're only at question 5. You're just giving yourself a reason to have the next meeting.
Right.
It's just like,
that's right.
Oh man, I'm really sorry we didn't get a chance to get those questions. So here's what we should do. So you answer these first 4 or 5 questions. I'm going to do this, this, and this based on what you shared. And let's follow up in a couple of days, and then we can go through the rest of these.
And what's fascinating? Sorry to interrupt you, Scott. What's fascinating about that is, say you do have 30 minutes, but the truth is they'll give you as much time as they need to if they find you engaging enough and your solution engaging enough. And I've gone to that point down to the 30 minutes and say, well, looks like our time is up. Would you like to reschedule at this time or this time? And they'll say, you know what? Let's continue. Wow. Okay. Let's keep rolling. How much more time do we have? 30 more minutes. Okay, great. Let me ask you a few more questions. And so they're connected. And that's a beautiful thing.
I do that all the time. And in fact, I advise clients on this, like, especially like an initial conversation, schedule a 15-minute call with the person. And what that does is it forces you to be concise in the first meeting, and it shows that you're respecting their time. Like, you're not asking for an hour if it's a first meeting. But secondly, when you schedule 15 minutes, you've in most cases bought 30.
Yeah.
Because if you schedule a call from like 1 to 1:15 and it's going well, you can always go longer, because it's pretty unusual that somebody's going to go, oh, I've got another meeting at 1:15. They might say, I can go another 15 minutes. I got a hard stop because I have to go to another call at 1:30. In which case, okay, cool. But if we got 15 more minutes, that's great.
Yeah.
You sort of buy that time, and just being respectful, like you said, like your recommendation is like, oh, sorry, we're at the bottom of the hour. Are we at a hard stop, or do you have longer? And if a lot of times they can go longer, they'll say, you know what, actually I can go a little longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple of really good podcast interviews. He actually has a podcast now. His name is Cal Fussman. Do you know this guy?
No.
He's a journalist, and he's written for Esquire magazine, and he's interviewed people like Mikhail Gorbachev and Muhammad Ali. Bruce, like he does like the top interviews. This guy is like the best of the best in writing these sort of long form exposés with some of the most famous people in the world. And I've heard some interviews of him talking about how his interviews go. And it's just fascinating how he comes up with this construct of questions that he prepares and the research he does before he goes into these interviews. Because you got a meeting with Serena Williams.
Yeah.
What are you're going to walk in there? You're like, wing it? Like, hell no. Like, he spends like weeks, months preparing
I could
for
see
that. And he has all his questions ready to go. And those questions, that preparation is what allows him to have such fantastic conversations and then create these articles that get published in Esquire. So Cal Fussman is a really fascinating guy, in my opinion. He's got his own podcast now, and he's been on the Tim Ferriss show. I think he's been on the James L. Teacher show. Mm-hmm. But as soon as you said interview, he was the first person that popped in mind. So I think if anybody can sort of get a sense for what's it mean to be a good journalist and install that into your sales conversations, it makes it a lot more fun. Is you're being more curious in those conversations as opposed to trying to sell through questions.
Right. And you the word I want to seize on with you is preparation. I think a lot of salespeople believe that preparation should be primarily focused around their product or service. Now, of course, you need to know that. But I would argue if I was going to train a new sales person, I would spend the majority of my time crafting questions, because in and of itself, that teaches them about the product or service anyway, probably even more importantly.
Yeah, and why it matters to the prospect, not just what the feature is, but why does it matter? You have to ask the question to identify if that matters or not to the prospect, and if it does, how much does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. So step 1, connect and set agenda. 2, interview like a reporter. 3, you said step 3 is to present the solution.
Right. So in that framework, you now have a wonderful reason to look back at your notes. And from a psychological perspective, being able to grab somebody's words that you've written and captured and use them back in terms of presenting your solution. You said, for example, Mr. Prospect, that saving X amount of time would be really valuable to you in this whole process, correct? Yes. Well, let me tell you how much time this will allow you to save if you take this particular plan. And they can't argue with you. They gave you that statement. So psychologically, they want to line up with what they've already told you. And so that just reinforces what they've already said to you, which it's not a ploy in any way to get them to do something they don't want to do. It's really reinforcing what they probably already believe, and you're just going along that path with them, right? So that's why I like to read back snippets of what they've said in response to those questions. And based on that, you could make marks, you could check mark, you could highlight, put stars by things that you know are going to be critical when you start talking about your product or service. And then hit it hard on the 80-20 side. Talk about the things that they had the most passion about, circle back with them on those things, and talk about your solution in that context. Don't go brain dead and start talking about your product or service in a rote fashion. That doesn't work, which I've done it. I've seen salespeople do it all the time. They've had some good questions, but then they fail to make the connection back during the demonstration to that. And it's like, why did you bother asking the questions if you weren't going to do that in the first place? So.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. You did something that you probably did intentionally, and it's as subtle, and I think it's important to call out. When you said back to the prospect, hey, Mr. Prospect, or hey, Madam Prospect, you said that it was really important for you to save X hours per week, or you wanted to make sure you're generating an extra 12% of revenue each quarter, correct? You checked to make sure that what you wrote down or what you're saying is actually what they said.
Yeah.
And to me, that does two things. One, it shows that you were actively listening, because you're verifying, hey, you told me X efficiency is important, or X percent of increased revenue is really important. So it shows you that you listened to them. And secondly, making sure that you got your facts right, because it's easy for, like, you might say something and express something in a way that makes sense to you, but by the time you say it and it gets to my ears, it gets out of your brain, out of your mouth, into my ears and into my brain, you didn't intentionally, like I could have mixed up what you said.
Totally.
And I think it's important to make sure, say, like you said that, did I get this right? And is that right? You mentioned X% efficiency is really important. Here's why. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Because sometimes they might say, well, here's what I mean by that. Well, I didn't say exactly that. I said this. You go, okay, got it. I'm really glad I checked because I just wanted to make sure I was understanding what you said. Because if you go right into, oh, Mr. Prospect, you said X percentage efficiency is really important. Let me show you how the product works.
Right.
If you didn't get that first part right, then you've lost them for the second half of what you wanted to do. So stopping and checking for acceptance is so critical there. And that's, as I said, you probably did this on purpose, but it might be subtle to a lot of people that haven't done a lot of selling in the past.
Correct. And it also dramatically enhances the trust with your prospect. This guy just read back exactly what I said. I can trust this guy. I think this guy's actually for me.
Yeah. And I think like tactically, coming up with you had this, maybe some kind of like nomenclature or symbols, or like if you know these 10 questions, that's the other thing too. It's like if you know what these questions are, and you know that question number 4 is usually answered as a percentage or a dollar or some unit, then all you have to do is write down the number 22.
Right.
If you know that means 22% or 22 million or 22 people or 22 hours, and just coming up with some kind of shorthand notation, I think it makes it easier to take the notes. You don't have to write down word for word. And presetting those questions ahead of time allows you to know you're not like making this up as you go along and trying to remember, oh, I wrote this back, 17 minutes ago, I wrote down this note. And I can't remember what this note is about.
Yeah.
Because I don't know where the conversation was 17 minutes ago.
Right. And this also gives you permission to stop during the conversation, because you already told them you're taking notes. So you give me an answer to question 4 and I say, let me just clarify. Did you say this? Is this what you meant? Okay. And take a note on it. Again, reporter style.
Yeah, exactly. Like I want to get my facts right. If I'm going to write this story about you, let's make sure we get the facts right.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So present the solution. And then to step 4, you said sharing price and guarantee. And the guarantee piece I'm interested to hear about this, because I don't think that most, especially like startups or any, sort of B2B and selling enterprise software for $100,000, it's kind of hard to think about the money back guarantee. Like, if you don't like it, just bring it back and we'll refund your money plus 10%. Like that's not the sort of guarantee that people are looking for when they're buying enterprise software. So I'm keen to hear about the step 4 about both sharing price and guarantee and why that's important even in an enterprise B2B sale.
Sure. So let's start with price. On that approach, what I found works well, if it's doable, is a three-price structure: ABC, 1, 2, 3, gold, silver, platinum, whatever you want to call it, because of the concept of anchoring, which I'm sure you're well familiar with. The first price somebody hears is the anchor price that's in their mind, and that they compare relative to the other prices. So knowing that, what I do is share first that I'm going to talk about 3 different prices, and I share what the differences are between them. So I'm not talking price yet. And then, right, and then I'll start with the highest price first. That's the anchor. And then I'll share the middle tier and the lowest price. And 90% of the time, people go to the middle price. And just depends on what they're looking for, of course. So before I get to the price, though, I'll say, here's the options, here are the differences. Now, if you were to try this, which option do you think might make the most sense to consider? I haven't even shared price yet. I've only shared the differences between the 3 options. So what we've done is we've eliminated the concept right at that moment of I've got to make a decision on price. And we're actually comparing options, and we're choosing an option right now that you think might work best for you if you were to try this. And then I'll share the pricing. And what I try to do in pricing is provide here's our typical price and a reason to act now. So we always have some reason to act now, and that's going to be some additional discount if we receive your authorization by a specific date. And that can backfire. So a good question to ask is, if I could offer you an incentive to move forward now as opposed to later, would you be open to even talking about that? Most people's curiosity will get the better of them. I have had clients say, just a handful, Brian, I'm not interested in talking about an incentive. You give me your price and that's how we're going to roll. Okay, that's fine. But most people say, yeah, I'm open to that. Okay, well then if we could earn your business by this time, would you be open to the option you were thinking about?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the approach with pricing. Then,
can I ask you a couple questions on that before we jump into guarantee?
Yes, please.
So you used I think a really important word, which is incentive. And incentive doesn't have to mean money. It doesn't have to be, hey, if I could provide you a discount to get started by the end of the quarter, would you want to get started right away? Because like a lot of people know, well, okay, so you're telling me that if I call you on July 1st in the beginning of Q3, instead of by midnight, June 30th, that you're not going to give me the deal. Right. I tell you, it's like, I'll take the deal. Like, come on. So incentive could mean other things, right? And we think of it as sort of like whether it's a bonus stack, or it could be, hey, we've actually have some open people on the customer success team that we can actually assign you a project manager as an example. Like that could be an incentive. Or an incentive could be like, oh, we'll do a quarterly workshop for you and your team to talk about best practices, or we'll add you to our product advisory board. So there's other ways that you can add incentives that aren't monetarily based, so you can keep your price that you want to charge without, and still get the deal, and offer these extra incentives in a way that are actually better for you. Like, wouldn't it be better if you had an assigned customer success person? Wouldn't it be better if you could do a workshop with your clients? Wouldn't it be better if you could do these other things? So I think it's important to distinguish incentive doesn't always mean monetary. And in fact, discount could be the wrong way to think about it.
I agree. It almost makes me angry when I hear the word discount. If you could act by a certain date, to your point about, the meaning by July 1, it's not going to be good.
Yeah. It makes me feel like this fake scarcity. Like you go to the car lot, you go to the Honda dealership, and you're like, oh, you like the blue one? Oh, that's great. There's actually somebody here this morning that wanted the blue one too. You're like, okay, I know this guy, I know this person is lying, and this guy's lying. But maybe they're not. Maybe this is like one ounce of truth, that maybe there was somebody here. Now I feel pushed into a corner and making a decision that I really didn't want to make. Right. Or, hey, if we could, if we offer you these incentives right now by, $2,000 dealer rebate, would you be able to take action today and buy the car? It's just like, And at the end of the day, like, people, when you're selling an enterprise solution, price is usually the last thing that they care about. And that's the second thing I want to talk about, your approach. It's about the product first, and the problem, and the product's ability to solve the problem. So which of these products, or which of the versions of the products, A, B, or C, do you feel like is the fit for you? Well, based on what you said, like A, the first one you mentioned, like that's the one we need. Here are all the reasons we need it. Okay, why do you need those things? Well, we need those integrations. We need that level of support. We need this many seats. Okay, cool. Great.
Yeah, so then they can't back down when you share the price, and they go, oh, wait, that one's $100K, not 50? You know, well, yeah, and here's why, right? You said you needed this many seats, you need those integrations, you need this level of support. That's why it's 100. And oh, by the way, remember that problem you're solving? It's a $10 million problem. So let's talk about guarantees, and then I want to make sure we talk about the step number 5.
Sure.
So guarantee.
Yeah. So with respect to the guarantees, that can also tie into incentives. But let me just give you another story here, and this probably would fit very nicely with your listeners. I was consulting for a software company years ago that was selling a product that allowed bankers and credit unions to take their whole loan process and whittle it down to make it to be prepared for an audit in about an hour. Typically, when this software wasn't available, it would take a week to pull files, to get everything ready for an audit. And it was all hands on deck, and it was just a madhouse for the bank typically to prepare. And then the boardroom is left open for a week for the auditors, et cetera, et cetera. So I looked at the pain points that the banks were having with an audit. And, we talked earlier, Scott, about 100% money back guarantee. Well, we didn't do that. What we did was we actually guaranteed certain performances on the software. For example, let's say one of the guarantees was if you're not fully prepared for an audit in 49 minutes or less from the software, we'll give you $5,000 or whatever, fill in the blank. There were other incentives as well, but here's what I coached the salespeople to do. Instead of right when they introduced themselves, they opened with the 4 guarantees right up front. And what it did was it completely disarmed. Again, that word's used a lot, but it really works. It disarmed the prospect because they knew this software company was totally focused on the pain points of an audit. And if they were willing to give an incentive to meet the demands of these 4 pain points and pay if the software didn't do it, my gosh, why wouldn't we try it? And their sales tripled from when they started doing that.
And so did they share the guarantee when they shared price? You said, because you said that they talked about it at the start. Did they talk about it during the start of the pricing part of the conversation, or the part of the entire sales conversation?
Right at the front end of the conversation. There was no context for price at that point.
Okay. So when we're first engaging, a qualification call, a needs analysis call, whatever that is,
mm-hmm.
then part of that conversation is sharing with that prospect at the very beginning of however long this process is going to go. It could be 6 months, 12 months to buy enterprise stuff. They know up front you have these specific guarantees.
Exactly.
And that's kind of what you live by.
Yes. And there were other software companies out there that had the exact same capability, but they weren't offering these guarantees. And as a direct result, they were able to leapfrog their competitors with those guarantees, even though other software did the same thing. So if another person came in and tried to present afterwards, they would maybe ask, do you have a guarantee for this? They'd say, oh, no, we don't. Okay, thanks for coming by.
Interesting. So how do you think about guarantees if, going back to the enterprise solution, right? Somebody's missing an audit,
mm-hmm.
and like, if we don't get you prepared for the audit in 49 minutes or less, we'll give you $5,000. I could see a scenario where the bank or the credit union says, well, I don't really care about the $5,000 because if we don't pass this audit, we're going to be fined $500,000.
Right.
Are there other guarantees, as an example, that you could think somebody could offer that's maybe not price driven, that would be meaningful for the customer?
I just think some other guarantees. See, and this can get wonky. If you're going to offer a guarantee that allows for a certain outcome and the data isn't put into the system appropriately, and it would have to be through an overview, an oversight of some sort to go ahead and provide that guarantee. But, I'm going to backtrack and I'll answer that question. But I saw a LASIK guarantee for eye surgery.
Okay. Yeah.
I just laughed when I saw this on a billboard. It basically said, if you don't get 20/20 vision, the surgery's free. I was like, what? Well, that's so stupid. I want 20/20 vision. I don't care what your guarantee is. I'm not going to go somewhere else and have it again. That's a bad guarantee, in my opinion. But back to your question, I don't know, other than if I was able to actually look at the software and look at the capabilities, compare it to the competitors, and then see where there's an opportunity to seize upon something that in the mind of the prospect is a serious pain point, and we can guarantee this because we know our software does this, then I would have the high confidence level to make that guarantee. I think it just takes being creative and really just brainstorming even wacky guarantees. Come up with 100 guarantees. I don't care how stupid they are. Eventually, you'll come up with a handful that really make a sense and can really drive the business.
Okay. No, that's just an open question. I think the principle of having some sort of guarantee, I think it's a confidence install some confidence in the prospect that at least you're willing to back up what you're saying.
Absolutely. It takes the onus and the pain off of the prospect and puts it back on the vendor where actually it belongs. If you're selling something to somebody, you need to own it.
Right. So then, so step 5, just to wrap up here, you said, close the deal.
Close the deal.
What is that part of the meeting?
So, what some people think about the closing questions is it's some magical, mystical part of the sales process. And the truth is, you know why you're there. The prospect knows why you're there. So let's ask some honest questions. And that gets back to the question I asked earlier. If you, after you've presented price, you're seeing hesitation, for example, and again, I know your listeners probably are dealing with very large ticket items. Is that correct, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of cases
Okay.
they're selling B2B, software. It could be 10K a month, $100,000 a year or more.
Well, and then I think it's very fair to ask this question. This is probably one of the most important questions that I've ever discovered. And that is, again, if I could provide you with some incentive to move forward now, as opposed to later, would you be open to that? And you don't have to ask that question. Now, of the 3 options we've looked at, you indicated that B was the one that you were most interested in. Would you like to move forward now with that, or do you have any further questions? So if you have questions, let's address them. Let's go ahead and take care of them. Let's unload everything we can so there's no more questions. And once we get to that place, then we go ahead and sign a deal or whatever the process is to move to the next level.
That makes sense. So you're just, it's more of a, we don't have to, give somebody the gun, get them to sign with our pen
right.
kind of thing. It's just more of, is there, like, getting to the close is more of, do we have any other ground to cover? Is there any information that's missing? Is there anything that's unclear? Is there anything that's been misunderstood?
Exactly.
It's more about like smoking out. Do we have more selling to do? Or is this a place where we can get to a decision, whether that's today, next week, or in the next, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really just a great way to put a finisher on the conversation you've had and make sure you've addressed every question that the prospect might have. And one of the great questions is to ask, is there anything I should have talked about, anything I should have mentioned that I didn't in this conversation today? And oftentimes I'll get 1 or 2 questions left over that I can address. And then other times, no, Ron, we've covered everything. Okay. Then what do we need to move forward now? Or what's the next step?
Yeah, I love that. That last question, it's like, is there anything I haven't covered that you were expecting, or what questions do you have that I haven't been able to answer? Whatever that is, you just, what you're doing is you're keeping control by appearing to give control. You're like reopening the conversation, saying, hey, it's up to you. I'm opening up the conversation, keeping it open. Should we keep it open, or are we done and we move to the next step? Because either way, you win if you're selling, right? Because if you're done selling and you move to, okay, let's talk about close and next steps, then great. We can do that. But if we're not ready to get there, then I win, because now I realize there's some additional gaps or information that needs to be shared, or questions that need to be answered.
Yeah.
So in either case, you win by asking that question. Dude, this has been great, man. I love this. I know there's a lot of other stuff in the book that we didn't get to, which is the reason why people should get a copy of the book in the first place. I mean, this is just the framework, and I know just based on talking with you and looking at the book myself, like there's a lot more to it. Like I mentioned, start of the conversation about some of the most common selling challenges. What are some exact phrases that you should be using? All of that kind of, like, it's a really good playbook for people to get tactical. And the stories that you shared, I think, are really useful for people listening, because then they can take those and think about how they could apply that to their business. So, so Brian, if somebody wanted to learn more about you, the work that you're doing, I mean, obviously we'll put a link to the book. We'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile. Is there any other special place that is the one place you recommend people go to check you out or get in touch?
Yeah, there is. I actually have a gift for your listeners. The first 3 chapters from the book on Audible for free. If they go to this URL, brianrobinsonbook.com, BrianRobinson book.com, you can download the first 3 chapters of the Audible version of the book. And then you can always go to my website. It's thesellingformula.com.
Thesellingformula.com. Okay, cool. So
Yep.
we'll put those URLs into the show notes as well.
Great.
And into the email that we send out to everyone on our email list. And we'll also put together a post for you that you can share out with your group, your tribe, whether it's your email list, your LinkedIn followers,
Terrific.
your Instagram peeps, if you're on Instagram, whatever that is. So
I'm a LinkedIn peep.
Yeah, LinkedIn peep too. Cool, man. Well, listen, it's been awesome having you on the show. I kind of want to keep going, but I know we're at the end of our time. So
I've loved it, Scott. Your questions have been awesome. I've really, really connected with your approach. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We do what we can to make sure your experience is good so that it's a good experience for everybody listening. So I appreciate that very much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, dude, we'll have to do this again. Maybe we can pick up again in a few.
I'd love to. I'd love to do a deeper dive into some stuff like the power phrases. That's fun stuff there. So whatever makes sense, feel free to circle back.
Awesome. All right, Brian. Thanks so much for your time, man. Good to see you.
All right, man. Take care.
Cheers. See you. Bye. All right. So that is a wrap. That is my conversation with Brian Robinson. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, if you're still listening to the episode here, is just ask for a quick favor from you. 2 quick favors, actually. Number one, wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, any of the listening platforms, if you would, go over there and leave a review about the show. Tell us what you like about it. Tell us how we can make things even better, and tell other people what you like about it. Reviews are one of the ways that these podcast platforms kind of rank and suggest our podcast to other listeners. So the more reviews that are there, and the more that it's easier for them to find, easier for other people just like you to find this podcast. The second thing we'd love for you to do is share this episode. If you found it to be useful for just like one other person, you're like, hey, I know this other startup founder, or hey, this brand new salesperson that we just hired to our team. They could really use a really easy baseline framework. And this conversation with Brian Robinson will help them get on that path. Just share the episode with them. We'd love to get the word out to as many people as possible. Nothing gets us excited more than seeing the episodes, the listenership go up, the subscribership go up, the downloads go up. So please do your part and share the news, share the good news about what we're doing here at Sales Qualia through sharing the podcast. So that's it for now. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.